That's something, well, I'm just describing sort of Ian Lowe's position. We could argue that, but this is what Lowe is saying is we're not even looking seriously at some of these alternatives. But well, that relates actually to the second issue. He thinks that more environmental damage has been caused by our existing industrial lifestyle, such as the lack of access to fresh water, interference with the carbon cycle, global warming, problems of toxic sort of waste disposal. All of these things we still haven't properly sort of come to terms with. And also, and third problem that he thinks that we've got to sort of face is a problem of increasing expectations of a growing population in a globalizing, human-dominated world. And this is what you're going to be looking at in your panel tomorrow. Peter MacDonald and Mark O'Connor are going to be debating what type of population Australia can face. MacDonald is arguing we need more people, and O'Connor is arguing that we need fewer people. Also, Lowe believes more sort of spiritually and culturally that what is happening is that we're living in a sort of a spiritual vacuum that bodes ill for the long-term future. He believes that sort of what's going to happen is in the future a lot of global conflicts are going to be associated with sort of natural resource depletion. And this is summed up as well by the United Nations Millennium Project, which says human development and environmental management are intricately linked to peace and security. Only by reducing poverty and improving environmental management over the coming decades can a rise in conflict and state failures be averted. In other words, environmental problems that we're facing are also causing some of the security problems that we're seeing around the world. And this is related to the fact, he says, that what is happening is that the world today is less equitable and, as a consequence, less stable as well. So catastrophists such as Ian Lowe believe that the inequalities that are entrenched within our modern economic system and the unsustainable materialistic values of modern consumerism can't be overcome through spreading the advantages of modern life to the rest of the poorer world. So here's a quotation from the former UN General Secretary Kofi Annan, who said, "If presently 1/5 of the world's population consume 4/5 of the world's non-renewable resources, which is the situation that we have at the moment, how feasible is it to expect the poorest 4/5 to achieve the style of living of the wealthiest 4/5? And Ian Lowe has actually calculated that if the entire world, if we try to bring everybody in poverty, the poorest 4/5 of the world, up to the standard of living of the richest 1/5, if the entire world used oil at the rate that we do here in Australia, and it could be pumped out fast enough, the global resources of oil would be gone in 2 years' time." This is what people such as the sort of the Club of Rome have called ecological overshoot. The way we're living at the moment already is eating into our resource capital, into our physical capital. And if we sort of try to expand this cultural system to the rest of the world, that is just not going to work. So what is happening here is that the environmental limits to growth, according to people like Ian Lowe, mean that only if Western cultures keep a grip on these scarce resources, in other words, keep the third world poor, will we in the West be able to continue to sustain the relatively high standards of living that we've come accustomed to. And Ian Lowe calls this a fortress world scenario. The wealthier and more powerful nations will have to use military might to provide their access to the world's limited resources and try and insulate themselves from the growing insurgency outside. So we're going to have a situation where 1/5 of the world actually lives in a more sort of, if we keep on along this sort of scenario. Yes?
That kind of threat started to happen in Africa and Botswana, or Nigeria, South Africa, and all those regions, trying to dam certain parts of that river.
Yeah.
And there has been some conflict between that.
Africa is where people have really been pointing this out, where the whole conflict in Darfur is not so much an ethnic and racial issue as it is one of environmental resource use as well. So yeah, you can see examples of this all over the place. You could even argue that the Iraq War is an example of that as well. So what Ian Lowe is warning us, what this catastrophist position is warning us, is that the increasing economic production of Australia has come at an increasing social and environmental cost. It's not sustainable. We're heading for a catastrophe. And I don't need to go into this, but if you think back to some of the panel discussions that we've had so far, you can hear that type of catastrophic argument as well. I think that Will Steffens would have been a good example of a catastrophist. And I think also that Richard Dennis last week would be a catastrophist. And the catastrophists don't consider catastrophists to be a sort of a moral term. The catastrophists don't see themselves as simply being scaremongers, because most of these people are using scientific prediction to alert the world to the consequences of our contemporary cultural behaviour. And almost all of them are actually optimistic. People like Will Steffens said he was optimistic that we as a species have got an option of altering our unsustainable practices. So they're not saying we're going to hell in a handbasket. They're saying that only if we continue along the contemporary economic and cultural ways that we've continued to go on over the past 200 years. So we just need to change our style of living. That's really what the catastrophists are saying. And this is what Clive Hamilton, you'll come across Clive Hamilton in he'll be giving a panel in the second half of the course, but he says, the implication of the unsustainability of material consumption levels, that we may need to transform our ways of living, challenges some of the most fundamental beliefs about how we live and how the future will unfold. A worldview in which continued growth is assumed. And in fact, Clive Hamilton wrote a book called Growth Fetish, a term which Richard Dennis used as well. This idea that sort of growth before everything else. And they have been questioning that. So they are the cornucopians. They are the catastrophists. Okay? That's that perspective. Let me show you, because we probably haven't heard, and most of the people I think you've had in this course so far would be considered to be catastrophists. But let me just put up an alternative perspective, because we don't often hear it. And you will be hearing some of it, I would suggest, tomorrow, but let's have a look at what the cornucopians are arguing, and I'll give you some example of cornucopian thinking. Cornucopians possess more faith in the ability of modern science to solve and address the problems of the environment. They would respond to the catastrophist pessimism by claiming that humanity has always and will continue to find new ways of producing more, and abundance will eventually trickle through to everybody else. The history of humanity over the past millennium has tended to suggest that we can find solutions to problems. Cornucopia, incidentally, is a sort of a Greek mythological vessel which is overflowing with abundance and fruit and wheat and everything like that. And so cornucopians also point out that the catastrophists, including many scientists, have been proven mistaken on many occasions. So they'll point out that in the 1970s they were scaring us that we were going to enter a new ice age, and now we're being told we've got global warming.
I heard that some scientists, like serious scientists, were actually saying in the 90s that Sydney was going to fly by 2000 due to global warming.
The cornucopians use statements such as that to say that we shouldn't listen to the sort of people who have got a sort of a catastrophic view on sort of environmental consequences. Yeah. So they also point out that so they point out, the cornucopians, that most catastrophists have got a pessimistic outlook on the capacity of modern societies to adapt and change to environmental and social and economic